founders back in 1972 were wise enough to realize that a community needed to have a vehicle like the coalition that could facilitate the community discussion and always be looking out for the interests of the community, and where the city of Pittsburgh government could come to and come for the views of the citizens. The organization is 40 years old. This is our 40th birthday, and that's a big year for us to think about all the things we've done in the past and where we're going and where the community's going.
There was a feeling that there was something better going on there, and there wasn't enough good use. And there was a problem with renting second-floor spaces, and there were just all kinds of things in the neighborhood that just didn't seem like it was as good as it ought to be. And that's where we all started. And I believe it or not, times haven't changed that much. I read about myself yesterday, and I was the finance director with Mr. Bigler. I don't think my role has changed in life at all from wherever I've been. Most businesses respect us and know that we care. And so we listen to it. And we know the issues, so we can talk about if somebody wants to do something in Squirrel Hill, we could say, what are you going to do about the parking? What are you going to do about the How can you help the rest of Squirrel Hill?
Squirrel Hill has stayed healthy. Even though there's turnover and even though people say, well, there's an empty store here, there's an empty store there, the stores are always filling up again.
When I look back, people really made an effort. And some of the names, I'm sure, are still with us here in Squirrel Hill. And when I look at the list, and maybe we'll review it at the meeting, we'll see who is still actively involved.
I moved back to Squirrel Hill 11 years ago. I had lived in Shadyside for a long time. And I realized how much I really liked Squirrel Hill. But there's some things about it that are kind of run down, and I started to work with the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition Litter Patrol, just because there's huge amounts of litter all over Squirrel Hill. And I think if people who lived here their whole lives had more pride in Squirrel Hill and looked around and saw the true treasures that are around them, that they might decide to take better care of it. And we put together a good committee, and they came up with 3, I think, superb people. Deborah Fardell, Pittsburgh Area Jewish Committee Executive Director. Robert Qualters, the terrific artist. Holly McCullough and the staff of the Squirrel Hill Library, which is celebrating 40 years. The place is the Manor Theater. 90 years in that same spot, all completely renovated. It's just, it's great.
Squirrel Hill is such a polyglot of people, and yet it still has that reputation of being the Jewish neighborhood. So I think it's a really interesting mix.
When I think of Deborah, I think of 2 words. I think of compassionate. She really does care about people in their lived experience and wants to know about it, as opposed to having people adopt her mores or her standard. And every day I think she wakes up and says, what can I do to make this world, to make my city, to make my neighborhood slightly better for me having been here? What a gift.
She became convinced that there needed to be a broader progressive Jewish voice than just the Pittsburgh Area Jewish Committee for whom she works. So several months ago, she reached out to some other organizations, Jewish organizations, and ultimately created the Pittsburgh Jewish Social Justice Roundtable. people around the country are noticing and calling her and saying, how did this begin, and what did you do, and how is it working? And I expect actually that this may be the beginning of something that we see replicated around the country. What she does on a day-to-day basis to make our society more tolerant improves the quality of life of human beings who will never meet her.
We know there are stereotypes about Mormons or stereotypes about Catholics. In the city, Catholics were very much discriminated against not that long ago. So we know that there are lingering attitudes out there, and that's what our work is really. At the end of the day, we're trying one by one to change the thinking. And really, the people that I want in my corner are the people who want to live in peace and just have a slice of this American life that we all want.
Squirrel Hill, from among the many neighborhoods in Pittsburgh where she could be doing this work, is the very best place for her to be doing this work.
Pittsburgh is a beautiful place, and we're self-conscious about it. When I crossed the Homestead Bridge, I used to see one of the mills structures, I think it might have been OH5, Open Hearth number 5, turned upside down, and it reminded me of a steer with its legs up in the air. So that was a terrific subject for a while. But I'm much more interested in the sense of the place, the people in it, what life here feels like, that.
I've really come to feel that he is a fabulous storyteller, and that it's more about that in his own life and the life of everyday people in Pittsburgh, really, than it is about Pittsburgh itself.
I like the fact that there's magical images of the city. When he paints Pittsburgh, he paints the hills, the mountains, buildings. He paints a lot of his pictures with the all seasons, but mainly with rain and snow. So you get to think about, they look realistic, that you've seen this in Pittsburgh, because he does that. And then he does a lot of the famous buildings in Pittsburgh and puts artists in the buildings and talks about what would it be like if they were there and they were drawing. He's an interesting person. He has a twinkle in his eye. He talks to you. He's down to earth. He lets you know who he is. And he talks about his art. If you want to know about his art, he'll tell you all about it.
Bob has been very well appreciated by people because his work is accessible in an era where work has not been that accessible. And I think people love being able to look at it and say, yes, I went to Kennywood. Yes, I went on that ride. Yes, I remember that billboard downtown where the smoker and the puffs of smoke are coming out of it. And I think that brings them into the work. But then he really starts dealing with deeper subject matter and is really a humanist in his approach, I think. What it means to be a man at this time, and how we organize our life, and what our places in this world end up being.
Although I was prolific and involved with a really good movement in California, it never felt right to me. I didn't want to paint that endless horizon, blue skies. It just didn't feel right. And it was only after I got back here, I came back here in 1968, and I've been here ever since. It was only after I got back here that I began to feel like I was really hitting on something that felt right to me. If people who own my work, or see it somewhere in a museum, let's hope, there are works in museums, look at it and say, there's something about that is just exactly correct.
It's interesting because we're having our 40th anniversary at the library, and so you spend a lot of time looking at historical documents, and you look at, the things that we were doing and the programs we were doing over years. And yet we do some of the same things over that time period, even through all those shifts, that the main focus is on what does the community need, and how do we get them the tools and the resources and make the connections that they need? The tools change, but the basic needs don't.
They were very, very involved. Vicki was very involved. Cece was very involved.
And you were very involved.
I was trying to be very involved, yes.
You haven't been president this whole 40 years.
No, no, but I was the first president. It was mostly to have convenience up in Squirrel Hill that I thought people really need a library that they can just hop into and the kids can go into without taking 3 buses or something. So it was that. And we had an objection, from the city saying we're not going to give you the property because it's convenient too convenient. But we raised enough concern on it that we got, and we had, people signing petitions and that. And we got it through.
Citizens saying, we really need a library here in Squirrel Hill. And the city really didn't think we needed a Squirrel Hill library. And the library at first didn't really think that was a perfect place for a location either, because we were so close to the main library. And it was the community that said, no, we really need it here. And that's been, from the day one that the library opened in 1972, we've been the busiest location outside of the main library.
It is very well used. I think the neighborhood that surrounds it is one that values learning and education in a very clear, strong way and makes using the library part of that. But it also is a symbol to the people in that community, in my estimation, of the importance and value and worth that they have. And they cherish that. And Holly manages to keep that place just chugging along so wonderfully that I've always had a really good sense of Holly as a manager, as a librarian, as a colleague, as, I think, a friend. She's someone we call on a lot in the library because she has great ideas. She's not hesitant to express them. And she's a good person.
Squirrel Hill by far it's the easiest place to be a library in that it already has such a strong infrastructure, or again, organizations like the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition, Squirrel Hill Historical Society, the Business and Professional Association, and the Jewish Community Center, so many different organizations that exist and serve the community. And that's amazing to me that we've been here 40 years, and that was completely out of a citizen initiative.
The theater has been around for 90 years. We just celebrated our 90th anniversary. It's one of the oldest establishments in the neighborhood. I have yet to meet someone from the community who doesn't remember it, who hasn't been there. I think it's very valuable.
Well, at 90 years of age, it's probably one of the oldest businesses in Squirrel Hill, if not the oldest. It was the theater to come to in Squirrel Hill. It seated 1,500 in the auditorium, which it was just remarkable. It was quite an event to go to a movie. Norbert Stern, who was Rick Stern's grandfather, was the first one in the theater business. And he owned the first drive-in theater in Pittsburgh. So Rick's family has been in the theater business now with Alexa, it's the fourth generation in the theater business.
My father and grandfather's first enterprise was the South Park Drive-In, which I think was the late 40s. When my mom and dad were married, my dad was the manager and my mom sold tickets at the box office. There were a number of theaters in Squirrel Hill. There was the Guild, which is now Clifty's. There was my dad and cousin George built the Forum Theater. So there was the Guild, the Forum, of course, the Manor, and the Squirrel Hill. So there was actually 4 theaters in Squirrel Hill, and now that the Manor is the only surviving theater, I think it's become more important in these later years.
Rick had a decision to make, which was, is he going to stay in the business or not? And he chose to do the investment in the digital, which comes back to him from the film companies. They actually reimburse you for the $300,000 it costs to convert to digital. And then he's put another $250,000 in to convert the concession area so that you can have food and alcoholic beverages before the movie and during the movie.
We've always had the dedicated clientele that, you know, obviously that's why the Manor's still here today, because of how the Manor has been embraced by the community and the dedicated clientele and residents of Squirrel Hill and the surrounding areas.
I am very proud of the work that my family has done in the theater and otherwise, and I feel really honored to be a part of the family, and I feel it's an important part of our legacy as well as the community's legacy to continue.
Squirrel Hill is a wonderful place to live because of the parks, the accessibility, the education system we have here, and the community we have here.
It's not an insular community at all. It is very much a diverse, pluralistic community.
It's a nice place for me to raise my family, and I feel very rooted here. But I also love the diversity.
It's a community that knows what it wants and that it values what it has.
There's a lot to see and walk around and meet people and have fun.
It's a good place to be. It's true, and I'm glad to know that one of my children lives there. One lives in Shadyside. A grandchild lives in Shadyside. But Squirrel Hill is pretty much our home.